This is an interview with Mrs. Carolyn Cunningham from the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute's Oral History Project. I'm Dr. Horace Huntley. We're at Miles College, March 6, 1996. Thank you, Mrs. Cunningham, for taking time out of your schedule to come and sit with us today.
You're quite welcome.
I'd like to start by asking some general questions about your family. Tell me a bit about your mother and father. Were they native Birminghamians?
Yes, well, my mother wasn't born in Birmingham. My mother was born in Philadelphia. My father was born in Birmingham, and but they both lived in Birmingham for the greater part of their young lives. They both attended Parker High School, although I do believe my mother attended Ullman High when Ullman became a high school years ago.
Yes.
And so they were part of the Birmingham way of doing things, lifestyle.
Yes. You were born in Birmingham.
I was indeed. I was born in Birmingham.
Okay. Do you have brothers and sisters?
I have stepbrothers and sisters, and most of them are still living with the exception of two.
How many?
They do not live here in Birmingham. I'm the only one here in Birmingham.
I see. And you recently returned to Birmingham?
I just recently returned in October of last year.
How many brothers and sisters do you have?
Oh, I have a number. My father and stepmother had 10 in all, and my stepmother and father had 2.
Big family.
Yes. I live mostly with my grandmother, and my grandparents reared me, I should say. So they brought me up as just a single person.
Right. Both your parents finished high school at Parker.
Yes, they did.
What did they do afterwards? What kind of work did they?
My father went from high school to the military, and that's where he remained for about 30 years, with the exception of a little time when he decided he wanted to get out of the military. And he did, and it was at the point where he said, I guess to himself, no, I really like the military. He went back in, and that's where he stayed. My mother, on the other hand, started a family with my stepfather, and she later in life went back to college. She attended City University in New York City, and she also has, I guess, about 4 courses toward her doctorate degree. She's a very smart person. She, after having all of the children she had, she decided that she still wanted to go to college. And she said to me that she wasn't going to let me outpass her, outdo her. And I don't have my doctorate, but she almost has hers, and I'm very proud of her.
So she's still ahead of the game.
Yes, she is. Yes. Very talented person.
So you were raised by your grandmother? And
my maternal grandmother and grandfather, and also with my father's mother and grandfather and grandmother and my father. So I had all of those people caring for me and
so you
taking care of me.
Just a cadre of people.
Yes, I did.
And were you the only child in the household?
Yes. Yes, I was.
Okay. All right. Where did you start elementary school?
I started elementary school at Kingston Elementary. I lived in Avondale at the time, and in order to get to Kingston, it was a matter of, I don't know if you're familiar with that area, but at the time there was a lumber yard, and we had to travel across the railroad tracks. We called it the bottom. Through the bottom, that was the lumber yard, and there was the school on the other side. So it was a matter of a little bit of travel every morning. But it was a wonderful school.
Is there anything that stands out in your mind about Kingston, your days at Kingston?
Oh, yes. It was a wonderful school. As I said, the teachers were just the best. I just believe that my foundation, as far as an education, started at that school. I had one teacher who will remain in my mind forever. Her name is Mrs. Little, and she taught me all of the poetry that I know. We had to learn poems overnight. The Gettysburg Address, there wasn't a discussion about, well, it's overnight, you can't learn it. She always said, you can. We memorized overnight. We did everything she said. And I just became well, everybody says I brag a little, but I just became the smartest because of her.
So after Kingston, where did you go?
From Kingston, because Kingston only went to as far as the 6th grade, I then moved on to Thomas Elementary School, and from there, Oldman High School, where I graduated in 1955.
Right. Were you active? Did you have a lot of extra
Curricular
Yes,
activities?
yes,
Sure,
thank you. I needed
sure,
that.
sure. I was rather, I guess, a little shy at the time, but I could always perform. And, you know, sometimes they say a shy person might not be able to talk to maybe one person or two people, but they can always speak to an audience. And yes, I was a singer. I danced, recited poetry. In the community, I was a Girl Scout. It seems like forever. I was a member of Our Lady of Fatima Catholic Church, where at that time it was over on 6th Avenue.
Right.
And Avenue F, they called it. Whenever there was something, when I went to Girl Scout camp, the Johnsons used to run the Girl Scout camp out in, no, this one was in Zion City. And I can't think the name of it. But anyway, I used to go there in the summer, every summer. And Mrs. Johnson was over it at that time.
So you were quite busy then.
Yes, I was.
That you were off.
I was.
How would you? What communities when you were at Ullman? What community did you live in?
I lived in Titusville with my great grandparents right there on Center Way, and there was a cemetery there. It has now been moved, and that's where Our Lady of Fatima Church and the school have been built in that area. I lived there.
That was a cemetery where?
Yes, it was an old cemetery. And so I lived there with my great-grandparents and in Avondale with my grandparents. So there were times when I lived with, it just seems, everybody.
Right. Right. How would you describe your community?
Well, Titusville was the kind of community that seemed to have been growing at that time, because I recall when I was a little girl, there wasn't, where the projects are, there were no projects at that time. There was just a pastor. And my friends and I used to walk all the way from Center Way to the pastor, where the projects are. Yes. We used to walk there and play in the pastor.
Is it Islington or Loveland Village?
It's Loveland's Village, And we would go there and play in the pasture with the cows and all were there. And, of course, we would get spanked because of that, because that was not where we were supposed to go, but I think everybody enjoyed going there. And that's what that type of community was. And there were there was one black store there and one Italian store in that community, and both are no longer there. And of course the cleaners was on Avenue F, run by a black person, and Avondale was a little bit different because there, in order to get to Thomas Elementary School, my friends and I had to travel through a white community. And I remember that it was that at that time we weren't supposed to do that. We weren't supposed to go through their community, and they weren't supposed to go through our community. So the thing is that when we did that, we would run very quickly through, and they would throw rocks at us. I don't think anybody was ever hurt. It was just that was something that happened. And when they went through our community, we would do the same thing to them. So, that's as far as that kind of conflict went. And
there were adjacent communities.
Yes.
Closely associated.
Yes.
Did you ever have any good relations with any of the children, any of the white children that lived near you?
Well, we didn't have a good relationship with the ones who lived in that little area. I think it was the cotton mill was right there on First Avenue, and the people the whites who lived in that area, I believe, worked for the cotton mill. I don't recall anyone having a good relationship with them, but on my street, there was a store, an Italian store, and the Italian family had 3 children, as I recall, and we all played together until we all of us started attending high school, and I recall that I went downtown on the streetcar one day, and I saw one of the little Italian girls. I spoke to her, and she didn't speak to me. Well, that just hurt my feelings. I remember I went home and I cried, and I said, well, why did she do that? Because where I lived, my grandparents had a big old house. It was a nice house that right there on 42nd, I think it was 42nd Street in Avondale, right up from Harmony Street Church. It was a nice area, nice big old houses, and we had a very long front porch. So on Sundays or during the rainy season, we would all sit on that porch and play, the Italian kids and I. Well, anyway, my grandmother said, well, this is the way that it's going to be. She just might not ever say anything to you, but don't feel terrible because I think she still likes you. This is just the way the South is. And I rather understood it. So
did you ever
I never
see
saw
her
her
again?
Never saw her again. Never. And my grandmother did domestic work. And I recall that when she took me to work with her, the lady's daughter the white lady's daughter always wanted me to play with her terrible toys, the dirty ones, the ones she should have put in the garbage, and I wouldn't do it. Of course, I had very nice toys. I told my grandmother, and she started letting me bring my own toys. And so that relationship wasn't the best.
Right. So your grandmother then worked as a domestic.
Yes, she did.
What kind of work did your grandfather do?
My grandfather was in the military and in his younger life, and he's always been a very good cook, so he was the captain's cook. During that time, the captain always had his private cook. So that's what my grandfather did. After he was discharged from the military, he worked for Marita Bakery right there on First Avenue, and that's where he worked until he retired. So my grandparents always worked. I don't know, my grandmother was such a budgeter. She was able to keep us everything together, she and my grandfather.
After you finished Oldman High School, then what did you do?
When I finished Oldman High School, I was 16 years of age at that time, and I went off to Xavier University in New Orleans. I remained there for a semester, and because I was 16, not really knowing what I wanted to do, the only thing I wanted to, well, I won't say I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I didn't know the best thing to do, because I wanted to join the military. And at 16 years of age, one of your parents had to sign for you. Now, at that time, I took the test and everything to join the Navy, and I just needed that signature from my father, who was overseas at the time, and he said, no, you can't join the military. You must go to college. That was a very good decision he made.
Why did you want to join the military at the
I
time?
had been brought up loving the military. My father bought me the first WAC uniform as a little girl. I had a little Jeep that I used to ride down the sidewalk. I just loved the military because of him. Well, I couldn't join the military at that time, but years later, at about 34 years of age, I joined the military, and they still had the WAC. So there were two of us who were older than the kids in basic training.
So after the first semester, you left Xavier?
Yes, I did.
And then what did you do?
I left Xavier, and still wanting to follow some other dreams. I couldn't join the military, but I wanted to be a singer. So I went to live with my aunt in Chicago. I attended music school there, and I appeared on some amateur programs.
Did you ever appear on Ted Mack's Amateur Hour?
No, I didn't. I didn't. And then I wish I had, because in a way I wish I had. But after I guess I could have been a singer, but I had to work too, because my parents weren't rich. So the first job I got, I really disliked it. And
What was that?
well, I had to get up very early in the morning and go to a hospital to work, and I worked in the dietary kitchen. And I do remember that the hours were long. I wasn't familiar with all of the desserts because, you know, they use those conveyor belts. It wasn't my type of thing to do. So my grandfather had already said I wouldn't like the job. So I had to call him back, I was in Chicago. I called him here in Birmingham, and he answered the phone. He says, well, you don't like that job, do you? I says, no, I've got to go to college. And I had to beg my grandparents to send me back to college. My grandmother said, well, we're not wealthy. This is the last straw. You go again, you must stay. And I stayed. I chose. This time they let me choose what college. Before, they wanted me to go to a Catholic college because I'm Catholic. But I really wanted to go to Southern University, and they let me attend there, and I stayed.
So how long did you stay in Chicago?
I stayed in Chicago, I think it was 2 years or a year and a half. Either a year and a half or 2 years.
And then when you returned,
you
started at Southern.
Yes, I went to Southern University and I graduated from Southern.
What was your area? What did you graduate?
Speech and English.
Well, what do you remember about Southern?
Fancy you would ask me that question because I do have a vivid picture of the way it used to be. It is not that way now. It's beautiful. But when I first attended Southern, there were no paved streets, roads on campus. And the one thing that I do remember is walking in all of that mud during the rainy season. And it was a muddy campus. And then, of course, it was nice, though, because we had a small dormitory matron, and it was safe. When I look back on colleges now and the way ours were then, I can say that we lived in a safe environment because we had everybody there. The doors were locked, and we weren't allowed to leave after 11 o'clock. We had to be in at 11 o'clock. We had to begin studying at 7 o'clock, so there were rules and regulations. And it took an act of Congress for us to get off of campus at night.
So was that a good experience? Did you enjoy the time that you spent at Southern?
Yes, I did. I really did. And, of course, Southern is situated right near the Mississippi River, and the campus sits on sort of like on the edge.
Have you been back?
Yes, I returned twice.
Then after you graduated from Southern, what did you do?
After graduating from Southern, I came back to Birmingham, and Dr. George C. Bell was still the principal of Oldman High School. And I remember my grandmother received a phone call, and she was told that there was a job for me if I wanted it, because it was in my area at Oldman High School. And I remember telling Mr. Bell that no, I really didn't want the job because I was going to California to live with my father because he had promised to buy me a car. That tells you how spoiled I was. And he had promised to buy me a car, and I really didn't want the job. I hung the phone. Well, my grandmother took the phone, and she said, well, she will talk to you later. She'll call you back. After hanging up the phone, she said, well, you really will have to take that job. You need to work. And so you must call him back and let him know that you will take that job. And I did as she said. So needless to say, I bought my own car, which was better, and I got the job. And I've been working ever since.
And how long were you at Oldman? This was around 61.
This was in the 60s. This was 61.
61.
I was there until the latter part of 63. And then, as I said, there were times when I came back to Birmingham and I worked.
Right.
But I taught drama and English there at Oldman when I first returned.
In 1961, I guess that's the year of the Freedom Riders.
Yes.
And 1962 is the year of the selective buying campaigns. Do you remember anything about those two events that were taking place?
Well, during that time, they were still meeting. There were meetings. There were still meetings.
The Alabama Christian Movement.
Yes, at the motel, that famous motel that is now, what is it now? A nursing.
It was A.G. Gasson's
yes,
motel
it's a
at the
nursing
time.
home now,
Yes.
and also at the churches. And at the time, I never saw anything written down to say that teachers couldn't participate in marches and demonstrations, but it was somewhat of an unwritten type of proclamation that you were not supposed to do those kinds of things. And I remember when I first started going to the meetings, I really had to sneak. I hate to say that, but it's true. And later, I became more bold, and I think most of the teachers who participated in all of that had a more bolder spirit. And I remember going with some of the other teachers at Ullman to the meetings, and whenever I remember the dogs and the hose pipes, the water that was turned on the marchers in the park, I was here for all of that.
Why did you decide to get involved?
I wanted to get involved because of the fact that when I was a child growing up in Birmingham, I remember the Ku Klux Klan. I lived right there in Avondale, and I remember that the Klan used to wait until midnight or so to drive through our neighborhood, and everyone, you could hear people yelling, turn out the lights, because my grandparents would turn the lights out, and we get very, very quiet. And matter of fact, everybody on our street, the street was just very quiet, and they would ride up and down the street. And I always thought that their headquarters was there in Woodlawn, at that park in Woodlawn. That's what we always thought. So I remembered all of that. I remember when we couldn't drink at the fountains. So I had a reason to want to get involved, because to me it was a challenge, and to me things would get better if I got involved. I had to work, and so there was so much that I could do. But as I think back, I think everybody's effort helped the movement. So at the time, I wasn't in the forefront. And even now, I have a tendency sometimes to do a lot in the background unless somebody nudges me to get into the forefront. Now, if I'm asked to do something, I will do it. But otherwise, I'll be back there somewhere doing something. And so I wasn't as verbal or as seen as much as I could be now, because it was my job as a teacher.
Were you in the classroom during the 63 demonstrations?
No, I wasn't the one. Now,
you were not teaching at that
No, I wasn't. Time. No, I was here during the onstart of everything, of the meetings leading up to.
Okay, but you were not here during April and May of 1963.
No.
When the children got involved.
No, I wasn't.
Okay, you had left Birmingham.
I had left Birmingham then.
I see. Mm-hmm. You mentioned that you were involved in demonstrations. Mm-hmm. Tell me about that. What demonstrations was this?
It was
here in Birmingham, or was this in some other area?
It was a lunch counter sit-ins in Louisiana. When I was at Southern University, we had the sit-ins at that time, and the school was closed several days because students were getting involved, and we were told that if we got involved in any marches, any sit-ins, that we would be sent home, and some students were sent home. I wasn't one of the ones who was sent home, but we didn't have classes for a while, so I was involved in that. When I came here, I was involved in the meetings, the mass meetings that we had, and the marches, and so I was around when the dogs were sicked on the marchers and all of that.
Okay, so then you attended meetings at 16th Street Baptist.
And
what were can you give me just a description of what the mass meetings were like?
Well, as I recall, they were spirited. There were speakers there. We, as an audience, was asked to speak if we wanted. that everyone had a chance to voice their opinion about what they would do to help end the strife that we were facing. There were people who helped to prepare the food, and there was singing. I just remember the togetherness of the people at that time and the challenges that they faced, knowing how the South was at that time, that even before the bombing, we could have all have been killed at the church. I mean, you know, sniper could have been outside, but I never got the feeling that people were that much afraid. I mean, I just think that they saw that something needed to be done, and they did it. Now that I think about things, I'm not too sure if we'd have that cohesive spirit now. I don't know. I've been thinking about that, because there was that cohesion among the adults and the young people. The young people were more active.
Why do you think that there was a difference then than now?
Well, as I said, during that time, we really had something to fight for. We really have something to fight for now. As I see it, I'm wondering if others see it. If there are people who don't see that prejudice still exists, that I have traveled here and been around the United States, and I've seen prejudice. I've seen where people of color have been the first, the last hired, and the first fired or laid off. Not only color, religion plays a part. Even as a black person, sometimes you might be too light-skinned or you might be too dark. You never know. I see a lot to still fight for, but I'm not sure. I haven't taken a poll. I don't know if the majority of people see that there still is something to fight for. And that's why I say I don't know if we have the cohesiveness. Our children are really interested in the material things in life. They're interested in the clothes with the names on the back and the gym shoes. I still call them gym shoes. And the boom boxes, all of the things that are material, wherein we were interested in an education, because we saw that as a means of getting out of a terrible situation, getting a good job. I'm not too sure, as I talk to young people, if they see getting an education as a way out of anything. And I'm not putting down sports, but I see that some of them feel that that's a way of getting out of their situation. But when I ask about attending college, spending time in the library, starting their own library with the money that they're making, it seems to me if a child has a job, that some money should be spent for a book for his or her own library. And I still see education as a way out. But I have a question. Am I the only one who sees that as a way out? Or do the children really see that as a way out?
Do you have children?
I don't. I've taught so many. I just feel that I have so many.
You have many.
I certainly have.
You mentioned that you witnessed the water hoses and dogs.
Yes.
Did that mean that you participated in those demonstrations, or did you see that from afar?
No, I was standing right there. I was right there in the park, and I saw all of that occurring. I wasn't one of the ones who was hit with the water, but I saw it with my own eyes. And the only time I really became frightened was when I sawith the statue, and it reminded me, the statue in the park that was just presented days ago,
The
and
statue
with the teenager and the police, the dog and the police. That reminded me of the fear, but at the time, I think it was the challenge and the fact that something had to be accomplished, that there wasn't that kind of fear. But yet when you look at the statue, there should have been fear. But it was just too much of a challenging effort.
There's been some criticism of the placement of that statue in the park. What are your ideas in relationship to the statue being placed in the park, and if it should have been or if not?
I don't have a negative feeling about it. I feel that it is symbolic of what happened.
So you were there. Does it depict sort of the spirit of what took place at that
Yes, it
particular
does.
time?
It does. It does. I think it's in the right place.
So you would be supportive?
Yes, I
then
would support it.
of that. I know there are people who were involved with the Fraternal Order of Police, for instance, who suggested that
Is that right?
it could have a negative impact upon how the community today look at policemen.
Perhaps so, but it is symbolic of what took place during that time. I remember leaving the South, feeling being afraid of police. When I first went to New York City to live, I really was afraid of police. And I was an older person because of what had happened.
This is what, around 63?
Yes.
So, okay.
And being an older person, I shouldn't have been afraid of police, but I was. Now, after having stayed in New York, my feelings changed. There are precincts there. You get to know the police. The police walk through the community. So the fear left. I just think that people don't really fear the police because they wouldn't fear the police because of the statue. They might fear the police because of their own experiences, maybe their present-day experiences with the police. I don't think statue would have anything to do with it.
Well, I don't think he was suggesting that people would fear the police.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, it was just the opposite, that people would not respect the police as a result
Is that right?
of the image that it projects there.
Mm-hmm.
Were there others in your family that participated?
Yes, I have a cousin who played an active role as a teenager, and she was one of the ones who was put in jail. So she has a vivid memory of sitting there on the floor and how the jail cell looked and how they were treated. Had to go without necessities, and yes, she.
Although you had left Oldman as a teacher at that time, if you had been there in April and May of 1963, would you have encouraged your students to get involved, or what would have been your stance on your student involvement in the demonstrations and marches?
I would encourage students or anyone. However, in the back of my mind, I know that I would give them some kind of insight into the danger involved. But it was an effort that I don't think anyone could have stopped the students from participating in the struggle. They would have found a way anyway, and I applaud that in them.
After you left Birmingham, you went to New York. What did you do in New York?
When I left here, I started working for the Department of Social Services, and I have to admit that I didn't know anything about welfare. So there was so much I didn't know. I really didn't know that we were poor. And the reason being is that I wasn't ever told that we were poor. There wasn't anyone in our house that said on a daily basis, well, we're poor. And I find that if you don't say that to children, sometimes they won't even think about it. They'll just go on with their life. And when I left here, I didn't know about welfare. There was an ad in the paper for caseworkers to work for the city of New York and for social services. I applied, and instead of being placed in social services for welfare, I was placed with children in the daycare center. So I worked for the division of daycare, but it was still under the auspices of the New York City Department of Social Services. And I worked for them for about 12 years. And a matter of fact, I was able to attend graduate school and still work for the Department of Social Services there, Division of Daycare. But while in school, in graduate school, attending Columbia University Teachers College, I worked at night for the state registry, child abuse registry. And my office was the office that accepted all of the child abuse cases coming into the city of New York. I have experience. As a matter of fact, I could probably write several books about what happens to children in New York City and all over, child abuse all over, because it's the same. Maybe not the same numbers, but the same kind of abuse that happens to children at night and on the weekends. And I've gone out on cases, so I did that for a long time also.
You mentioned that you were 34 years old, you decided to go into the military. Is that correct?
Yes.
Why did you make that decision?
Because it was a dream come true. I always wanted to join. I couldn't, and I forgot about it after working for the city. Then I had worked for the American Red Cross. I had all those jobs. I really forgot about joining the military. And to be honest, I saw the ad in the paper, and it did say, Uncle Sam wants you. I said, does he still want me? 34 years old. I called the recruiter, and I didn't tell him how old I was, and he said, well, come to the office. And make a long story short, I did. I took the test, and I joined the 42nd Infantry Division, which is called the Rainbow Division in New York City. And the Rainbow Division has a long history, military history, and I'm proud to say that I was a part of that. And that's where I learned to be a soldier. And I'm glad to have been in the WAC, too.
How long were you in the military?
I stayed in the military I was in the Army National Guard first, and then afterwards I joined the Reserve. In all, it was 18 years between the National Guard and the Army Reserve. 18 adventurous, good, and rewarding years. I never thought I actually could become a soldier because I had a background in education and not getting dirty and all of that, but I loved it. I loved it.
Why 18? Why not 20?
Now that would be, as I say on the talk show, that would be another show. But I'll put it in very, very small bag.
Yes.
I spent 18 years in the military, and on a weekend, on a weekend, I went to my unit, had to re-enlist that particular weekend, but I also had to pass a PT test. And the stipulation said that if you do not pass the PT test, you will no longer be a part of the military. Prior to that, now this occurred in November. Prior to that, I had been practicing everything that I had to do, and on a rainy day, I passed that PT test and I was tested by one of the officers in my unit. I was soaking wet, passed the PT test, and I got a call from the commander saying that my captain should not have given me the test, and he disavowed the test. So then in November, I had to take it again. In November, I did my very best, but I missed 4 sit-ups. I did 18 push-ups. I did 22 sit-ups, and I did my 2-mile run in 23 minutes. And at the end of the day, my captain said, Sergeant Cunningham, I'm so glad to be a sergeant too, that's another story. Sergeant Cunningham, you did not pass your PT test, and you've been a good soldier, but we have to discharge you. So I was discharged with an honorable discharge, but feeling very terrible that it had been a part of my life for so long, and that's all I received. And so I remember driving down the I-5, crying and all of that, and that's what happened. 4 sit-ups, that's all I needed. I wasn't
Do you-
overweight or anything like
Do you
that.
think that the decision was made based upon you being a woman, being black, or whatever?
The decision was made on the basis of the fact that I wasn't a male, that I didn't have a family. As a female, I didn't have a family. I think as a female, if I had had a family, I think that would have meant something. But I was a female without a family, without a husband and children, black, and that was it. And I did not belong to the good old boys club, and that was it. On my discharge, it says that I am not physically fit, but I know that I am, but that's what it says, and so that's the way it goes.
So you returned to Birmingham very recently.
Yes,
And
in October.
What are you doing now?
At the moment, I am subbing for the Board of Education, Birmingham Board of Education, and also for the Catholic Diocese. I have been subbing at Our Lady of Fatima Catholic School and also Midfield School District.
Well,
And I have another job. I also sell property out at Elmwood Cemetery on a part-time basis.
okay. And this is a commercial.
Oh, it is. That's right.
That's right. Well, Ms. Cunningham, I just want to ask this final question. If there's anything that you would like to convey to whoever may view this video, you have the opportunity to do that now.
I'd like to convey the thought that hard work is worth it. That there are rewards in hard work. I've had to work hard. I haven't regretted a minute of it, and I'm looking forward to working hard for many years in the future. I plan to be around for a long time because I haven't finished everything that I have to do, and I know that hard work is a part of it. Also that we're never alone because Jesus Christ is right there with us at all times, and I know that he's with me. And so he just keeps me going, and he keeps me smiling, and that's important to me.
You have a beautiful smile.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cunningham, for coming out and being with us today. We certainly do appreciate it.
You're quite welcome. It's been a pleasure.
I'm there, was still there.